very good evening to you and welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Now, many South Africans are still reeling from the shock of the record high unemployment figures that were released by Stats SA yesterday, showing that 34.4% of us are now unemployed, the worst it has been since the quarterly labor force survey was introduced in 2008. One of the sectors that have taken a serious knock thanks to the trail of destruction left by the COVID-19 pandemic says further job losses can be prevented. Once hailed as one of the key industries or sectors with the greatest potential to boost the country's economic potential, the South African tourism sector is making an earnest, if not desperate, appeal to the government. Tonight's tourism sector panel is among several that we'll be having on the program, looking at how we can save or even create more jobs. The Watchdog starts now. Well, to set the scene for this evening's discussion, here's an insert by our reporter, Mandela Foundation.
The Dome, once home to a spectacular display of events, first opened in 1998 with a live concert by Diana Ross. The last 23 years have seen the who's who's in the entertainment world grace the venue. From fulfilling Disney dreams to helping couples plan their dream wedding, hundreds of South Africans have experienced the magic of the Dome. For the father of four, Philip Radebe, the Dome represents his career. Having started here as a floor manager to operations manager, Philip's entire career was built here. But after more than a year without any functions, today is goodbye for Radebe.
I've been part of the Dome since day one in 1997. That's when I've started working here. So yes, today we on this position, which is very, very difficult to accept because my whole life has been at a Dome.
While the venue has been sold to a major second-hand car dealership, those in the events and conference space say this could be the future for many more other mega venue events if COVID-19 restrictions are not relaxed. Industry players are projecting losses amounting to over 1.4 billion rand since last year.
When we went into lockdown in March last year, in the first, or let's say the second quarter of last year, we had already lost 784 million rand. Where events were not allowed to take place. We're now 18 months into the pandemic and we're looking at over 1.4 billion, which in effect means that what we've got as an estimate, over 200,000 jobs are either lost or affected.
As the industry pleads with government to allow a 50% venue capacity, the industry says it has done its homework and it can reopen safely.
We are calling for 50% capacity in terms of usage of venues. And one looks at some of the bigger venues around the country, whether they're convention centers, they've got multiple venues. We're saying that each of those venues have got separate entrances and exits, they've got separate toilets, they've got back of house. So for those venues in totality, we should be restricted in terms of what the current number is.
While many in the industry are quoting government's green light, some say despite the COVID-19 pandemic, South Africa still lags behind its international counterparts. This as some countries have started to open up events.
And you've got certain markets, South Africa being one of them, that's obviously slower to recover. But what the governments overseas are doing is they're opening up the trade shows and the professional exhibitions much earlier than we are. We have a ban on public gatherings, which is we don't really agree with, because at the end of the day you can go to a shopping mall. Our business events are much more organized, much more structured. We can open them safely.
As the industry continues to fight for its life, many breadwinners like Philip Radebe face an unknown future as they join the unemployment statistics. Mandela Foundation, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, joining us now for a conversation is the CEO of SA Association for the Conference Industry, Glenton de Kock. Matsatsi Ramwale is the former CEO of the Tourism Business Council, and she is now with the Tourism Transformation Council of South Africa. Wayne Trotton is the CEO of HTI Consulting, a specialist hospitality consulting company focusing on assignments in Africa and the Middle East. Good evening to all three of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to come through for this conversation this evening.
Thanks for having us, Rio.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, I mean, Matsatsi, if I may start with you. I mean, I was looking at, last year's foreign arrivals, which dropped by 71%, from just 15.8 million in 2019 to less than 5 million in 2020. And I would imagine that the situation would have gotten worse by now. And it is your considered view that with a bit of thinking, cooperation, conversations with the government and, of course, the rest of the stakeholders, this situation can actually be addressed.
Well, good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. And thank you for having us and to discuss our industry that a lot of us love so much, and that is really down on its knees. And as per the insight that you have earlier on, a lot of livelihood have been affected. And so to answer your question, Vuyo, the pain that we are feeling in South Africa, and my colleagues will bear me out on this one, it is the pain that has been felt by everybody in the world. If you look at the World Travel and Tourism Council's figures, and you listen to a statement that came from the WTTC CEO in the last week, the entire world of travel and tourism is really down on its knees. And so what we are going through here in South Africa is not unique, because the minute you control or you cap the movement of people, whether it's for business purposes or whether it's for leisure, which is what gets people to travel, you are then definitely going to affect, economies across the world. And so that's what we're feeling here in South Africa. And I'm then, as I listen to your question, I ask myself, what could be done differently? And I think I go back to what Glenton has said. I think we need to sit with government and try to see, take sector by sector. Shall we say subsector by sector, and look at the peculiarities for each one of them to see how we can safely open, because livelihood have been affected, and the tourism value chain everywhere is very long. And so there's not only tourism affected, a whole lot of other sectors within our economy is affected.
Now, Glenton, you are the CEO of South African Association of the Conference Industry. We know, as a matter of fact, that conferences bring people in big numbers, conferencing is responsible for bringing people to our country. There have been, obviously, there are various aspects to why we can't attract the kinds of numbers we are used to, during a pandemic. It's the travel restrictions, the modes of transport, and then come other things like how many people you can put in a room, which we're going to talk about, which is a call you guys are making. Just take us through, the chain, what conferencing means for those. I know you guys take it for granted because you are in the space, but for the viewer out there, what does it mean to have conferences in the country? What are the gains for the economy?
Well, thanks again for having us, and good evening to all the viewers that are joining us this evening. I always use two examples. I use the President's Investor Conference. It's been held in November for the last 2 to 3 years, and we know what the targets are to get people to invest in South Africa. Without an event like that, without bringing, technocrats and people with knowledge as to what investment is required, what amount of money is required, the entire back end of that event is run by members within our association, by professional conference organizers, event organizers. So while in this instance, for this particular interview, the viewers are seeing us on the screen, you've got a backroom team that is working extensively to provide viewers with the link. It's similar to a conference. The conference is about knowledge and bringing knowledgeable people together to help society. And I think from a South African perspective, particularly within Africa, we look at the investor conference as an example, but you can also look at the mining indaba that's been held for many years in the city of Cape Town. In itself, while the event happens, one must be mindful of the trade that happens on the floor. You know, many times we are referring to the economic value of what people bring to the destination, and we forget about the trade that happens on the floor. And I think for ourselves, our call has been quite simple to government, that we know that because of us being on the red list, and there's been a lot of media around that, particularly with our source market from the UK, the clarity that we're seeking is that we have to build from within. Within South Africa, we have to rebuild. And for many of us, we have to consider ourselves as a startup. In the insert, in terms of the event that we put together this afternoon, we've done not only our homework, but we've also ensured that we put together reopening guidelines as to how we specifically need to meet in South Africa and also be ready with international visitors that we're hoping to attract in the next couple of months. It's been fairly tough because, as Natasha said, around the world, every government has dealt with this particular sector very differently. And without lobbying and advocacy. And our kind of key bone of contention at the moment is when the president speaks about gatherings, he lumps the business events and exhibition sector into that. When he speaks about the number of people that can gather, we are limited now to 50 indoors, 100 outdoors. Economically, it's not viable. And the opportunity for a country like South Africa is that we have national programs, particularly the ones that the South African Convention Bureau has, to drive people into rural areas. So we can meet government's targets, we can help government achieve in areas of economic growth. We can also help with the reorganization and potential new skill set that as South Africa, we can compete with the best in the world. So it's quite a complex way to look at how we've got to where we are, but it's not that difficult to understand that the case studies that we've built throughout lockdown is available to government from the private sector. Thank you.
Wayne, what of those who have done it? I mean, as Matsatsi was saying, which everyone knows, I mean, the pandemic has hit everyone the world over. But what of those who have done better, relatively, of course, than us, done better? What have they done better? What are the sort of things, or what are the sort of things that people are beginning to do, while on the one hand they are still managing the pandemic, but on the other they are taking into account these economic concerns, issues?
I think everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
I think, thanks very much. I think everybody's grappling with the fact of impacting on economic growth. And I think the markets that have tried to keep the industries open and try and protect those industries and have not controlled too much on the supply side. I mean, demand will kind of regulate itself. I mean, in the sense, if you look at, as you mentioned earlier in the international travel, I mean, international travel, what I have from 2021 versus 2019 in June this year, it's down by 85.6% through all the airports in South Africa. And domestic travel is also down by like 53.8%. So some of that you can say it's in terms of kind of forced lockdowns and forced regulation. But then there's also the other side of it is in terms of demand. Demand is down. The demand for traveling is less. And I think until the vaccines open up, we've seen some green shoots in terms of recoveries and how markets have recovered. And I think what some of the other markets are doing is tapping in, like South Africa is, into the domestic market and into the domestic leisure market, more specifically, what we're seeing. So I think in terms of I would say, let the market regulate itself more. Other countries haven't put as many, stricter forced lockdowns in terms of, governing certain numbers, and basically let the demand side, which will be down, kind of regulated to a certain extent.
Matsatsi, you have the benefit of having been able, to sit around the table with the people who matter. And over the past 18 or so months, there have been all these conversations about what needs to be done, the sector putting forward proposals, and of course, members of cabinet, including the Minister of Tourism, having to balance, as they always tell us, having to strike that balance between protecting lives and saving livelihoods. What have been the main concerns? In other words, what have they said are the reasons why they cannot accede to some of the demands or requests, however way you put it, that the sector has been making in order to, protect this sector from even a worse experience than is currently the case?
Well, for our sins as an industry, because we're so diverse, Vuyo, our industry, a lot of people don't understand how long the tourism value chain is. Tourism, it encompasses from, the industry that Glenton represents, which is, what we call the MICE, the meetings, incentives, conferencing and exhibitions, to a sector that Wayne is very active in terms of hotels and hotel development, to tour operators, travel agents, tour guides. So the value chain of tourism is very long. Now, the major challenge that I picked up, sitting in the Tourism Transformation Council with the Minister of Tourism, has been, how do you as government come in and be able to assist this industry, knowing how wide it is, how long the value chain is? And that's been the difficulty that government is facing. Because, when you listen to Glenton, the MICE industry has got its own peculiarities, and so therefore they cannot be covered with the entire blanket of lockdowns. And then you go to the hotel industry, which as well is the value chain there is long. You're moving from B&Bs to guest houses to boutique hotels to major hotels with 100, 200 rooms. And you then say, how do you apply a measure that makes sure that you safeguard the employees as well as safeguarding the tourists when they come in there? So that's been the major challenge of our industry, as to how government comes in and come up with the measures that protect the people of South Africa and the people, the workers as well, and protect the industry. And so, but what the industry has done, the Tourism Business Council, working together with South African Tourism, presented what is called a tourism recovery plan. And in there's measures where they literally, they run a survey with the member associations like the one that Glenton represents, where they ask each one of the industry participants to say, what are these measures that we can present to government that says we can safely open our businesses? So I think it's been that divide, Vuyo, that government looks at what has been presented and they say, how do we then shall we say, harmonize this entire presentation in front of us to make sure that we also appear to be looking after the people of South Africa? Because one of the things you mustn't forget, Vuyo, is that government sits in the middle. So they have the public of South Africa who says, okay, you are allowing this industry to open, from the wine tourism industry to conference industry, you are allowing them to open, you're putting all of us in danger. So, and then government comes and faces the business people who say, listen, you need to allow us to open business. And so it's been this difficulty in the middle of how to bridge the divide. And this is why I said earlier on, the government needs to be able to sit and look at this industry subsector by subsector. You look at the vehicle rental industry and say, how do you operate? How can we safely open you? And then you look at the MICE industry, because within the MICE, by the way, there is this one called the incentives industry. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with tour guides? How do you deal with nature guides? And the entire value chain need to be dealt in that regard. And I think that's where the divide is. And I think everybody's just trying to be finding their way through this thing, because it's all new for everybody. And that's been that major challenge. And then you look at restaurant, for instance. It's another much part of our industry. Catering and all this, it's so wide, that I think government gets boggled in its mind in terms of how do we deal with these people and how do we assist them.
But one would have thought that these conversations would have taken place by now. I mean, with only a couple of days, Glenton, to go before all of you launch Tourism Month, that at least there would have been conversations that have actually been completed. If not completed, at least you would have gone some way in reaching an understanding among yourselves and with the government and everyone else, who is part of the conversation, that when Tourism Month, during Tourism Month, these are the things that we will be able to do, which would hopefully begin to address the, issues, all these issues that Matsatsi was talking about. Have you not done that?
We've done that from the 9th of March last year. I think the challenge that we all have, and I think the touch is highlighted in certain issues around the complete value chain and supply chain and within the demand, is the stop-start approach. We've just come out of a third wave, and that's a good sort of starting point, because last year this time we had gone from level 3 to level 2 to level 1 in December, and by the 27th of December we were back to level 3. So it does make implementation of policy, it does make implementation of recovery very difficult. As an association, we had our National Congress in May of this year, and we were at level 3. We had, I think, about 250 people indoors, and then we hit the third wave, which meant that in that third wave, your June, July school holidays, and whatever you had planned, particularly from a Gauteng perspective, remember that we were not allowed to travel for leisure from Gauteng, which meant that at a business level, whatever activity or event or business meeting was organized, anybody in Gauteng would have difficulty to then leave to go to the other parts of the province. So I think the conversation is there. I think what we're grappling with is obviously the intent to find sustainability. And we're hoping now that it seems as if we're at the back of the third wave, but there's obviously concern about a fourth wave. So you can imagine the planning around that. And when we make requests like we have, it's very difficult for government at times to balance the lives versus the livelihoods. The unfortunate thing is that livelihood, as we've seen today with the function we had for the farewell for the Dome, livelihoods are affecting so many families. What we don't want at a policy level, we don't want people or youngsters that are watching the show saying that I don't want to be part of the tourism industry because we're not sure where we're going to be. So I think that conversation's there. I think the intent that we're calling for from all parties, all social partners, is that we have to build from within. We have to take destinations, regions, villages, and build tourism cultures that allows us to know that we can meet safely and responsibly, and communities are part of the conversation. So we've got an opportunity I think we've got an opportunity as Destination SA to reorganize our policy framework. And the good work that's come out of the department is that shortly Cabinet will announce a set of norms and standards. And the work that Matsatsi and her team are doing on the Transformation Committee, there is conversations happening. But the challenge, as I said earlier, is around implementation and the follow-through. And I think that's really where the frustration lies, is good intent, but very little follow-through at times as well.
Well, you have a new minister now, and I don't know how long it's going to take for her to get into grips, with what is going on. Is that a worry, Wayne? The fact that there's now a new minister in the middle of a pandemic that confused all of us and that had this detrimental, effect on the entire sector. Is that a worry for you?
Well, I think anytime, I think once you get used to initial minister's policies and you understand where they're coming from, I think you get a lot more comfort from that perspective. I'm not an expert in dealing too much on the government side. We focus a lot more on the private sector side, but I think, yes, I think that's where the industry bodies are the ones that need to be lobbying and ensuring that that the voices of the private sector are front and center from, in terms of dealing with the new minister. But yeah, anytime you would have something during a crisis, a change, you would expect that there would be a period where that new minister or new position of power would take a bit of time to establish themselves. And in this kind of environment, we don't really have that much time. We need swift decision making and on the road to recovery.
Matsatsi, and I'm saying this because I was reading a piece a little earlier, people expressing reservations about the fact that, having reservations about the fact that we're right in the middle of this pandemic, which has brought about all these challenges, which have basically rendered this sector. People have lost jobs, people are unable to operate. Obviously, they are not making money. It's had a huge impact on livelihoods. And right in the middle of that, the politicians do their own thing. And then you give a sector that is particularly vulnerable at this stage a new political head. And people are wondering whether that was actually a prudent thing to do.
Well, Vuyo, I think, sometimes we like to stress about things that are not very, in my humble opinion, that are critical. Because I think what we should be worried about is policy consistency. And so to me, as I humbly say, that as long as there's no change in policy with a new political head coming in, which in this particular case, I don't foresee any of that happening. One of the things that I do besides sitting and being a member of the Tourism Transformation Council of South Africa, I'm also one of the 7 panel members who have been appointed by the previous minister to review the national tourism policy. We've been doing some work since October last year, and we're eminently going to be seeing the minister to be able to update her in terms of where we are with the review of the policy. So from a continuity point of view, Vuyo, I don't think there's a major concern because the foundation is there. I mentioned earlier on the tourism recovery plan, which the entire industry took part in it. Everybody was conversed with South African tourism and all the tourism associations to be able to come out with this comprehensive document of how do we get tourism to restart. So when the minister comes in, and I think in the last week since she walked into office, and I'm privy to the fact that she met with the team in the National Department of Tourism for them to brief her in terms of those critical aspects of the strategy, the recovery plan. And so the next thing is for her to meet the different agencies. So I'm going to be sitting in with the minister on 2 occasions to update her on the Tourism Transformation Council's work and where we are at, to survey where transformation is in the country, and then to be also updated in terms of the review of the policy itself. And so I don't foresee, Vuyo, I don't foresee the minister changing tune. I think what we can foresee, which is where you then begin to factor in an individual style, it's what will be the issue that the minister picks up and she runs with them, and what's the energy that she brings into the different aspects. And I think that's what you can look forward to. But in terms of the critical things that drive tourism, I don't think that we can put, and we shouldn't stress about that. We should be welcoming this new minister and say, Minister, here you are, you're the new sheriff in town. So these are our critical issues in the industry. And I think our industry is very much ready to meet the minister, to be able to update her so that then she picks up the speed and then she walks with that and run with us with the energy that is right here. Because we definitely, we are struggling. A lot of people have closed businesses, families have lost, some people have lost lives, because, banks comes to them and they start calling the loans. It's been really a bloodbath, and we really, really need an urgent recovery. And may I say this as well, that to my fellow colleagues in the industry, let's also look at the pandemic and the lockdown as an opportunity to do things differently, to rebase our economy and build so that when the pickup comes up, which is focused around 2020, late 2020, to 2023, we're very much ready as South Africa to give the world a new perspective, a new offering from South Africa.
Well, after this short ad break, we're going to look exactly at that, what to do differently and how. This conversation continues right after this quick ad break. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. If you've just joined us, South Africa, on the back of the numbers that were released yesterday by Stats SA, showing that 34.4% of us are now unemployed, the worst it has been since the quarterly labor force survey was introduced in 2008. We're looking at the tourism sector that has taken a very serious knock since the pandemic started, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The question we are asking this evening, is whether how can we prevent further job losses? How can we protect our industries? And tonight we're speaking to players in the tourism sector. Wayne, I'm going to start with you this time around. I don't know how preparations are made when, who gets consulted and what inputs do they get to make, who gets to take those inputs or take some of those inputs, leave out others, and so on. But if you had that opportunity, even at this last minute, as the minister perhaps prepares to launch Tourism Month, and then comes to you and says, what do you think? What are the most important things that we can do or even experiment with during this Tourism Month, things which will hopefully then take us some way as we begin to rebuild? What would you say to her?
Well, I think we need to start trying to encourage people to come back to the country. We can open up the tourism sector in terms of opening up businesses so that there aren't any restrictions in terms of sizes and gatherings and when you can open, etc. But as I mentioned previously, the demand is what's going to drive things. And with that decline in demand and with us sitting on, the kind of red list, I think we're at a point now where our vaccination drive is gaining a lot of momentum. So I would say that we need to get messages out there in terms of trying to encourage tourists coming back as the vaccination increases. I mean, just to give you an example, in terms of the European Travel Commission, reported that there was an announcement to welcome US vaccinated visitors into certain countries in Europe. And that saw a huge uptake in terms of air ticket bookings into those markets. So we're seeing that obviously vaccination is going to be the key to opening up all these markets. And I think we need to be ready for that. And the country needs to be ready. We need to vaccinate also make sure our frontline tourism workers are vaccinated. Some of the countries have done that as a priority because tourism in our country represents a significant proportion of GDP and also in terms of jobs. So I think that's what we should be focusing on in terms of encouraging people to travel back.
If we take then away in the easing of restrictions, isn't that going to depend a lot on whether people can actually travel to South Africa? Something which is not which is not in our control.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the message, it's probably a lot of a PR message. I think, just a good example is if you look at what happened during the water crisis with day zero, all the negative publicity that we had around that, and also with, when we announced the fact that we identified a variant in South Africa, and that has changed things quite considerably. So I think it's a lot around managing, the public relations side of, encouraging people, because I don't think that we in any different situation to any other country. And I think we need to try and manage that better in terms of trying to get us off certain, red lists. Otherwise, as you're saying, the tourists are not going to travel until everyone is fully vaccinated. Yeah, and we're seeing new variants. So with the new Delta variant, that seems to be, prevalent across many countries now. We should be using this as an opportunity to try and, reclassify our status amongst the international travel destinations.
But I mean, what if even on the other point of the PR messaging you are talking about? How do you counter? What is your counter argument to a United Kingdom, as they did in the past, saying that this is about protecting our citizens? Yes, we hear your message, and we even support you. But fact of the matter is that we have an obligation to our people first. Well, how do you counter that argument? Wait.
I don't think I have all the answers, but I think that the more you open things up, I think we do need to try and manage that. As I mentioned, if you look at what happened with the example of day zero, in terms of that negative publicity that we had, which took a while for people to come back to the country. So obviously our vaccination drive is gaining momentum. And if we get our vaccinations up to a certain position, we need to be ready on the PR, and we need to be ready to welcome, people that are vaccinated. So it is a tough one, but I do think that, when we're starting to see more and more variants, the impact of the variant that we had is less of an impact now. Now's the time to try and change perceptions.
Clinton, I would imagine, foremost in your mind is the ability to hold these conferences, to have bigger numbers. Now, if you were to stand in front of that command council and, try and convince them, that this is the right thing to do for the economy, and you will indeed be able to do all the right things while at the same time, ensuring that, the industry survives. What would you say? What would you say in front of those doctors and scientists and, of course, politicians and everyone?
And weirdly enough, some of us have been there in front of them. It's always about confidence. As South African citizens, we have a lot of confidence. We go to shopping centers, we go to malls, and on that basis, when you're attending a business event, such a lot that you have to fill in terms of paperwork because of the way that we've put together our self-regulatory reopening guidelines. We also regulated by the SASRA Act. And in doing that, as an industry, we've also proved through proof of concept events that we've done, whether it's a business event, we did another one today, we did the exhibition, and we did a live event. We did them in that particular order. And two things always come back when you start that conversation, because somebody from the Department of Health will go back to two specific studies that they always use at the command center. One, we remember the church gathering that happened in Bloemfontein. And then the second is, in December, we had the issue around the rave. So those are always thrown back at us. But what we've done is we've remained resilient as an industry, because our view is that through our resilience, we need to build confidence. Because as Wayne rightfully said, and we really would want to welcome more travelers in South Africa, our narrative needs to be one that as South Africa, we are able to meet safely. As South Africa, we have put all of the necessary safety measures in place. And as citizens, we are confident to do that as well. Now, the difficulty, and that is the respect that we have to have because of our progressive constitution, is that, freedom of movement, freedom of association applies at times to whether or not I'm going to attend a conference or not. Necessity in terms of going to a shopping mall, I need to be there. So that needs to be weighed up. And we're doing a lot of work because the narrative around confidence starts with government and starts with corporate South Africa. Because there are many a business that's considering going back to the office. And as much as we followed what's happening around the world, and before we came online, I was envious of what's going to happen this weekend with the Formula 1 Grand Prix, probably another 60 20,000 people into a stadium. It has to be a phased approach. We clear as an industry, and when we stand in front of the command center, we don't want a full opening right now. Ours is quite simple. If we don't get 50% capacity, plus 30% capacity, let's prove ourselves in that particular small window. Second is, as we said in the insert, allow us, in terms of our bigger venues, our convention centers, they've been turned into hospitals that are now turned into vaccination sites. Allow those venues to do 50 times 250s, for instance, in a safe, responsible manner. So allow us to work in a partnership that shows that we're not asking to go back to where it was. It will never be there, because with the confidence in people getting comfortable to meet. And for us, small is more. You do far more smaller meetings, confidence will build up over time. And second to that is, the next 8 months is quite important, because between government and corporate South Africa, we need to understand the working from home scenario, how long that will take. And in some instances, we've seen what's happened around the world, where mandates around vaccines are now the order of the day. I don't think we need to go there in South Africa, but I do believe that we need to understand the holistic view in knowing that we need to do the right thing at the right time. And at the moment, it's about a responsible, phased opening approach, and not a gung-ho approach from ourselves in the industry.
Matsatsi, across the sub-sectors, is there an appreciation of the difficulty or the difficulties that we are all facing as a country, but also a willingness, or in addition to that, a willingness to adapt to the changed circumstances instead of getting things worse? Glenton was mentioning a few examples that perhaps hardened, the attitudes of whether it's the politicians or, the command council. I mean, those incidents didn't help, because once you went back to conversations about opening or reopening or opening further, then people pointed to those examples, as the bad things that should not have been allowed. Do you think now, the sector in its entirety has a sense or an appreciation that we are in uncharted but also difficult territory, and that perhaps compromises would have to be made, as Glenton was saying now, that the association, for example, is not averse to an incremental approach? Do you get a sense that everyone thinks that way, or at least the majority of players?
We are, many things can be said about our industry, but the one thing that you cannot say about our industry, it's being adaptable, being flexible, always looking for a better ways to do things. And so earlier on, I talked about the tourism recovery plan. And I talked about the presentation that was done to Cabinet and the Command Council in terms of what the tourism industry, in its broad sense, has, is willing to do. So South Africa's tourism industry has a very good name internationally. If you look at, a few weeks ago, there was a story that was making the rounds in the US about how certain South African operators were not going out of their way to make tourists comfortable and when they come to our country. And, that research revealed that it was just one incident of something that just gone bad. But our industry and the operator going out of their way to make sure that the protocols of COVID-19 are being adhered, and more is done. And this is why, if you look at the numbers at the moment, there's a lot of people who are still traveling into our country because they know that our operators, whether it's the hotels, whether it's the tour guides, they go out of their way to be able to make sure that they make you feel safe, because they know, they're very aware of the image and some of the negative messaging that has been sent out there about South Africa, and that COVID is rife and we're not doing the right protocols. But when the people come here, they actually go back home to the UK or wherever, with praises about our country. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that our industry has gone, always demonstrated they're willing to go out of the way. You look at the restaurant, what they've done with all the lockdowns throughout, level 5 to 4 to 3. They've always been, sitting around with government to say, what are the things that we're transgressing on? How can we make it better? Always looking for strategy. You look at the hotels, they've adopted, and Wayne will bear me out on this one, adopted some international standards, where, they were even, in terms of how guests are being looked after. The industry came out with some measure that says, let's go out of our way to make sure that people feel safer. Because before the protocols that government can announce, the individual industry members know that if they do a good job of looking after the tourist, if they make you feel safe, you will return knowing that I was looked after in that place. So it's been done in the conference industry, as Glenton is saying. It's been done with the car rentals. It is done with the coach and the airlines. Have a look at what the South African airlines have done, to motivate that it is safe to open. We were among some of the first airlines at least in the world, to be able to make it feasible for people to be able to travel safely. And so what I'm saying to you is that, sometimes there's a lot of perceptions which are wrong. And this is why an engagement and to be able to allow us to demonstrate what is it that we can do in the conference industry for safe opening. What can we do in the hotel industry? And so the last thing I want to mention of you in this regard is that there's a lumping sometimes. There's a lumping of what industry trade stakeholders are doing as opposed to what the general public is doing. And when you begin to lump that, you are then making the industry suffer from the, shall we say, the misdemeanors or misbehaviors of ordinary members of the public. And I think we need to make that separation. Glenton mentioned the issue of the rave festival. That has nothing to do with us as an industry. The youth came in and they misbehaved. So, to what extent does public and the society and parents have a responsibility to equally meet us halfway to make sure we open safely for our industry to return? And that's the point I want to bring forward.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks to all of you for coming through. Glenton de Kock, Wayne Trotton, and Matsatsi Ramawela. Today, as South Africans and many people around the world remembered Nelson Mandela, the recent incidents of looting and violence that took place in South Africa last month took center stage. Speaking during this year's installment of the Nelson Mandela Foundation's annual lecture, Professor Njabulo Ndebele reflected on the recent unrest, saying those behind it wanted to ultimately turn it into a gangster state by undermining the Constitution and the rule of law.
The South African Constitution was brazenly and concertedly attacked. The wave of looting, burning, and other forms of public violence, destruction, and lawlessness, which the entire world will have seen, and which swept two of South Africa's provinces just a month ago, caught many of us unawares. But deep down, as we saw the unfolding chaos, we knew that the kindling for such a fire had been building up over many, many years. The planned, rehearsed, and deliberate disruption of the economic lifelines of our country shocked the entire South African population. Had the perpetrators of these deeds succeeded, they would have demonstrated publicly the blueprint by which they would govern South Africa into a future of more instability, more poverty, more ignorance, as the very basis on which they would exercise their control over the South African population. They intended to turn our country into a state without the rule of law. A tin god would have been installed as head of state to become the beginning and the end of his own laws by which he would preside over a full-blown gangster state. The conditions for looting were created with the intention to expose the needy to the chaos under which they would acquire commodities they desired but could not afford, because they still lived largely in an economic system and the social conditions that undergird it, which, as we all know, were inherited from a long history of colonialism, imperialism, and apartheid. They also banked on the devastations of COVID-19, which have led to massive joblessness and social disruption. The South African Constitution, a living work in progress, was designed to be the solemn means by which we could alter many unsustainable legacies of our history. In assisting us to carry out this task, the South African judiciary, through adjudication of the rule of law, which covers all aspects of South African life, has been steadfast in its commitment to ensure the integrity of state governance by calling to account the executive authority to honor collectively, in word and deed, its sworn oaths of office.
An introductory statement there by Nelson Mandela Foundation Chairperson Professor Njabulo Ndebele. Now, former ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda delivered this year's Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, focusing on the rule of law, international criminal justice, and its contribution to sustainable development. Now, citing the recent unrest in the country, Bensouda says mistrust in public institutions have fueled a hostile response among the people.
Recent events in South Africa have shown that there is urgent work to be done to build a more inclusive society. It is clear that economic inequality and mistrust in public institutions has fueled a hostile response amongst the people. The expanding wealth gap is a clear pointer that we must work towards a progressive economic model that levels the playing field. We must work together to keep the Madiba candle of hope burning in a time where multilateralism, neo-apartheid, and weak pillars of accountability continue to impede sustainable development. Despite the many challenges, there is room for progress to reduce inequality, fight corruption, and restore trust.
And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Just join us again tomorrow evening, same time, 8 o'clock sharp. Have a good night.